Hi, I'm Dave Karger. Thanks for being with me today on TCM. We're winding down this Saturday afternoon with a masterpiece of film noir written by, directed by, and co starring Orson Welles. From Universal in 1958, it's Touch of Evil. This is a movie that's often considered one of the best films Orson Welles ever made, but it wasn't a film he was supposed to direct at all. Touch of Evil began as a vehicle for its top billed star, Charlton Heston. Heston plays a Mexican narcotics agent who becomes involved in a case that's being investigated by a corrupt police captain. At the time he made this film, Heston was at the peak of his Hollywood career. He had just finished starring in the biblical epic The Ten Commandments and would soon win an Oscar for the definitive performance of his career as the star of Ben-Hur. Heston was in a position to make any movie he wanted, and he was intrigued when producer Albert Zugsmith suggested an adaptation of a pulp novel called Badge of Evil. What really intrigued Heston was the mention of the man who had been cast as the movie's villain, Orson Welles. At this point in the late 1950s, Welles had all but given up on directing movies in Hollywood, where he had become a pariah after making a handful of expensive flops. Studios would only hire him as an actor, and Welles took the work in order to finance movies that he was making in Europe. But Charlton Heston misunderstood and thought that Welles's involvement also meant that he was the writer and director. At Heston's insistence, Welles was allowed to come on to write the screenplay and direct, but he was told he would only be paid for his acting work. Welles agreed, and he made the most of it, turning out one of the most brilliant and stylish films of his career. The movie also benefited from a terrific score by Henry Mancini and masterful camera work from cinematographer Russell Meddy, including an opening tracking shot that's been studied by filmmakers ever since. From 1958, also with Janet Leigh, Joseph Kalia, Akeem Tamaroff, Marlene Dietrich, and a roster of Hollywood stars making cameo appearances, Touch of Evil. Despite his reputation for extravagance, Orson Welles managed to bring Touch of Evil in on time and under budget, and he was proud of the film he made. But Welles's version suffered at the hands of the studio, Universal Pictures, in post-production. He was barred from the editing room, and he wasn't allowed to shoot any necessary retakes. One of the biggest changes the studio made to the film was to run the credits and Henry Mancini's music on top of the film's extraordinary opening shot. When Universal's version of Touch of Evil hit theaters in 1958, the movie was a flop, and it became the last film that Orson Welles made for a Hollywood studio. But 4 decades later, Welles's version was finally restored, following meticulous instructions he left in a 58-page memo to the studio. The re-edited version, which premiered in 1998, successfully boosted the film's reputation, a reputation that has only grown since then. Up next is the second installment in the 2024 documentary series, The Power of Film. We presented the first episode last week, and we continue with the next part now. Don't go away.
Next on TCM, The Power of Film Part 2, trapped between fate and destiny. Then, Scarecrow. And later, Dog Day Afternoon. Our Buscemi is worse than our bite. Tonight.